Hello, and welcome to this episode of Human Rights Magazine. My name is Derek McCush. More than 4 million people have fled the conflict in Sudan since it erupted in 2023, mostly to neighboring countries where they endure severe hunger. Many wish to leave the region. How is the outside world dealing with this refugee crisis? What are the deciding factors in who may leave and who must stay? In this episode of Human Rights Magazine, Charlotte Jean-Gilles talks with experts about the ways in which Canada is responding to the needs of those who are trying to escape the violence.
Hi listeners, my name is Charlotte Jean-Gilles. As someone who has learned about and felt the urgency of Sudan's humanitarian crisis, for this podcast, I decided to explore Canada's ambivalent relationship with the Sudanese diaspora and its treatment of Sudanese refugees. I started by discussing the idea with Dr. Khalid Mustafa Meitani, Associate Professor of Political Science and Islamic Studies at McGill University. In our talks, he told me about a saying in Sudan, that Sudan is a teacher. So, my goal and hope for this podcast is to learn from Sudan, from the Canadian Sudanese community, and better understand the inner workings of the relationship between Canada and the Sudanese diaspora. I spoke with 3 well-informed people about the political landscape and the Canadian Sudanese with whom they interact, touching on some of the legal aspects, personal hardships, artistic inputs, and the gendered reality of the struggle. My first interviewee is Mr. Imad Sati, who works for the Sudanese Canadian Communities Association, also known as the SCCA. This organization is doing crucial work by working with the government, providing information about the changes in Canadian policy, and offering support to Sudanese.
First of all, my name is Imad Sati. I am based in Edmonton, Alberta. And so in the organization, we have been campaigning for Sudan. And so to stop the war in Sudan, so we have basically few major items, to ask Canada and the international community to intervene and stop the war in Sudan. And then also help the affected people, humanitarian aid for the people who are displaced inside Canada, inside Sudan, and who are displaced outside of Sudan. And the other thing is also basically the immigration and helping people who want to bring some of their families to Canada, also helping them.
The next guest is Ms. Doa El Mardi.
So my name is Duha El Mardi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Sudanese community here in Jajage in Montreal. I'm a core organizer with the Sudan Solidarity Collective, which is a diasporic Sudanese group in Canada that works to support grassroots formations in Sudan right now. I don't necessarily identify as an activist. I mean, it's something that I do, but I also just see it as a responsibility that we all have. So it's not so much a job or a title or anything like that. I think it's just that many of us realize that we have responsibility in this world to work on, improving it for our communities today, and of course for our future generations. I started being more involved in social issues back when I was still in Sudan. I was a student at the time. It really mostly came out of the realities of living in Sudan, especially living in Sudan as a woman in the time of the Bashir regime, having to deal with a lot of deeply embedded misogyny, and especially on a state level, and also seeing a lot of incredible women around me who have been educating themselves and educating our societies for so long and working so hard to kind of reject these kind of laws and really kind of help us see better worlds for ourselves. I came in 2018, so it was a few years back. And I was in the US, actually. I was doing a fellowship in the United States for a year. And then the year after that, I applied for asylum in the US because that's when the civil disobedience had started back then in Sudan, and sort of the political situation was not moving to a good direction. And so I did enter Canada from what's known as Roxham Road. It is now closed, I believe. And it is a way that many people, many migrants cross into Canada from the United States. And I entered in Trump's first year. I was there in Obama's last year of power and Trump's first year of power. And I think for me it was just very traumatizing and just really really not great in any way. There were many instances in which I really feared for my life. A hijabi Black woman at the time was just no joke. Like, it was really, really hard. I've had physical attacks. There was obviously no way for me to go back to Sudan. There was no way for me to renew my passport. My passport had expired, which means that I can't apply for a visa anywhere unless I go back to Sudan and reapply for a passport. It just wasn't the option for me at the time. My only option in terms of survival, really, at the time was to figure out a way to get out of the US and find a place that is more safe.
Lastly, I spoke with Ms. Karina Juma, who helped elucidate the various ways in which the law impacts the situation of Sudanese refugees.
My name is Karina Juma, and I'm currently an articling student, meaning I'm training to become a lawyer, and I anticipate getting called to the bar in a few months from now, so just in late May, early June. So I'm just on the tail end of articling, and I work in an immigration and refugee law firm called Heron Law Offices. And we do, as the name suggests, we do a lot of work around different immigration applications, whether it's economic based or family, class sponsorship. And my passion specifically is refugee law, and that's what I hope to build my practice around. So I'm really passionate about different refugee pathways, humanitarian pathways. And I came into this work with a background in, of course, going to law school, but I also have a master's of international affairs, specializing in health, displacement, and humanitarian policy. So this job really helps me blend together all of those passions. And I'm really excited to be speaking to you today and telling you more about what I know about refugee law in Canada.
Sudan has been coined by several reputable agencies as the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. The crisis started in 2023 when the RSF, Rapid Support Forces, and the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, engaged in a struggle for power. Since then, the UN released concerning numbers about the repercussions of the war. I quote, 12.7 million have been forcibly displaced and 24.6 million are facing acute hunger. In response to this dire situation, Canada has opened up pathways for Sudanese refugees to enter the country. However, they require Sudanese to have certain paperwork like biometric documents which none of the hospital or health centers in Sudan are able to provide. This leaves Sudanese assailant claimants in limbo. There are also other issues which our guest will touch on. But first, Ms. Juma will provide more clarity on the pathways and requirements for refugees seeking to emigrate to Canada.
As far as I know, for the Sudanese refugees or Sudanese nationals in general, there have been different pathways introduced. So there are the temporary pathways for people from Sudan who are already in Canada but who came as visitors, and they're able to extend this status free of charge, or they can opt to change their status from visitor to worker or visitor to student, and they can do so until October of this year. There's also a different pathway for Sudanese nationals who have family in Canada. So if they have a family member who is a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and they entered after the conflict worsened on April 15th, 2023, but before July 15th, 2023, so a really short window of time, then those people are able to apply for open work permits, study permits, visitor records, which is once you are here in Canada as a visitor, but you want to extend your status, you wouldn't get a new visitor visa. You would get what's called a visitor record. So it's just a different type of document to show that you have the ability to stay here. They can also apply for a temporary resident permit, which is basically if a person doesn't have another pathway to stay in Canada. So maybe they don't meet the requirements of a student, they don't meet the requirements of a worker, then they could apply for an exceptional stay under a temporary resident permit, which is more of a humanitarian type of status. And then another pathway is if you're already here and your family member is a citizen or a PR, you can apply for PR as a spouse or as a child. So now to move to the more permanent pathways, there is refugee resettlement, like I had just given you an overview of. And just yesterday, actually, the federal government announced that it is committing to resettle more Sudanese refugees. So 4,000 government-assisted refugees by the end of 2026, and then 700 through private sponsorship. The difference with the humanitarian pathway for the family-based pathway is that this is for people who lived in Sudan when the conflict worsened in April 2023. And they have to be either the child, grandchild, parent, grandparent, or sibling of a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And the family member must be willing to support their application. In this case, they are not refugees because they're not claiming under a ground of persecution, and they were in Sudan. In order to be a refugee, you have to have crossed an international border. So for this humanitarian-based family pathway, we're talking more about internally displaced people who are still in Sudan. They couldn't leave for whatever reason, or they're just displaced within their community. The refugee resettlement is for people who have left Sudan and are living in a neighboring country, perhaps. So that's to distinguish the different types of pathways. And just to give you some examples of differences between the two sort of groups are, we have a smaller capacity for Sudan. So the 4,000 government assisted refugees and 700 privately sponsored refugees, compare that to Syria, for example, where we had over 100,000 people settled since 2015, so over 10 years. And that was through a mix of government assisted and privately sponsored refugees. And there's also another program called the Blended Visa Office Referred, or BVOR stream, which is not really used very often, but it's a blend where the government provides financial support, and then the the sponsors, private sponsors, provide the settlement support. For the humanitarian pathway, so the family pathway, not refugee resettlement, we do have the family anchor requirement. So that just means that the person coming to Canada needs to have a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident family member in Canada. We saw this also for the Gaza temporary resident visa program, as well as for the Colombian and the Haitian Venezuelan program. So it's not just an open PR permanent resident program accessible to just anyone. So it excludes anybody who doesn't have that family link here. And also people who are not permanent residents cannot serve as a family link. So for example, if you just became if you were a refugee and you're in the process of waiting for your permanent residency, which can take, I think the latest numbers are around 2 years or more than that to get your permanent residence once you've been accepted, once your claim has been accepted, which is an incredibly long amount of time. In that waiting period, you're not eligible to sponsor to act as that family anchor for your family member in Sudan.
Here's what our two Sudanese guests had to say about Canada's response.
Yeah, there are some good things, but I think Canada hasn't done enough yet. But they are done. For example, they donated some money for the humanitarian aid. So that's one good thing which we do appreciate. But that's not enough compared to the conflict itself. Basically, almost more than half of the people in Sudan have been displaced. And the people who are not displaced, they are also greatly affected because economy has totally stopped. Even if there's some peace in that area, but that means the economy stopped. You cannot import or export to the area because of the conflict. So there is a famine going on, and there is health issues, health crisis, safety issues, all this. Even people who are not directly affected with the war, they are affected. Yes, it's not enough. I think Canada should intervene more with the international community to push these parties to end the war. So the main part is to stop the war. So if the war is stopped, people can find their ways slowly to stabilize and get back to normal life. Almost every person in Sudan and who is not even in Sudan, like myself, is also affected by the war. Myself, I need help to help the other people. Everyone is affected. So, like several hundred millions will do nothing for all these people. And of course, yes, the main thing, if they can stop the war, then nobody should be responsible for paying this money, and we understand that. But the key thing is to stop the war, and then after that, then help some people to go back to normal life. The major thing is we ask that they help push hard to stop the war, and then help those people in Sudan and outside Sudan for the humanitarian side. Yeah.
But of course, 1,700 is applications is quite jarring. It's really quite jarring. It's like we have really seen what they can do when we had when the war in Ukraine started, right? We have seen, of course, rightfully so. It's a great response, and that is the response that we had hoped would happen to the Palestinians, would happen to the Afghans, would happen to the Colombians, to the Haitians, to the Sudanese. But that wasn't the case. And it was too far of a difference, really. It was just not even not comparable in any way. And you could really see, right, the kind of discrimination and the kind of who's deemed as a desirable refugee, a refugee that is welcomed, and who is a refugee that is not welcomed. It's definitely better than nothing. I want to say a lot of countries actually haven't done. So Canada is actually one of the few countries that has actually done a family reunification program. A lot of countries like the US and the UK and so on, they have not done those kind of programs, unfortunately, and the Sudanese communities there are still pushing. But again, seeing the response that they were able to have for Ukrainian refugees and this response where people are asked to come up with ridiculous amount of money in a short period of time to bring their families to safety is quite ridiculous.
The low number of places available to Sudanese refugees in comparison to the magnitude of the crisis has been brought up time and time again during my interviews. Here's what Ms. Juma offered as an explanation for the disparities between refugees.
For Ukraine, we saw an unlimited number of temporary resident visas issued. And so they weren't arriving as refugees, but we had over 300,000 arrivals under this Canada-Ukraine Emergency Travel Program, or the CUAET. Then for Afghanistan, we had a commitment of 40,000 refugees to be resettled since August 2021. And then there's also a different pathway for Colombians, Haitians, and Venezuelans. And under that pathway, which was a humanitarian PR, not a refugee pathway, 11,000 spaces. So you can see the differences in the numbers, maybe politically motivated, maybe because of the representation of the different diasporas. Canada has a huge Syrian community, so that may be one of the reasons why we see a lot more uptake in Syrian refugees. Same with Ukrainians. Canada has a long history and relationship with Ukraine. There's no family member requirement for Ukraine. So in this particular context, it might just be maybe there's a mistrust. Maybe Canada doesn't have an established relationship with Sudan to the same extent. It could be that in the past couple of years, there have been situations where Sudanese nationals have made refugee claims, and then the government has turned around and said, you are actually a Kenyan student and you are impersonating somebody else. So there have been situations where there have been accusations against Sudanese nationals. So there could be just that suspicion could have limited the program. So imposing this requirement of having a family member makes it more restrictive, and you have to have that presence in Canada already, and that family anchor has to commit to supporting you in Canada. So for example, like in the refugee stream, in the private sponsorship stream, the sponsors will provide 1 year of settlement and financial support to the refugees who arrive. In this family anchor, it's really similar that the family anchor or family, if there's multiple people who are family members, they need to have enough income from the previous year. So they need to show that they meet the income requirement. And then they need to have funds in their bank account to show that they have enough money to support the one person or family coming. And it is quite burdensome. So in this particular case, you could have one person as the anchor, but can you just imagine how much responsibility you would have to take on to support a family versus in the refugee resettlement context, you would have a group of 5. So you have other people to help you out. Here, you're shouldering most of that yourself. And we must remember that often these family anchors were in that refugee situation not too long ago. So maybe they don't have the capacity to shoulder that responsibility. And does that mean that they can't bring their family over here? So it creates some conflict there of who's excluded just because they simply do not have the funds to show. And the government said that they will waive certain fees here. So for biometrics, for example, and for the right of permanent residence fee. But in the grand scheme, this waiver is very small. So biometrics is only $85. The rights of permanent residence fee is $575. So if you look at that, around $700 they're waiving. This is so much less than the $9,000 that you have to show as being in your bank account to support somebody, plus the application fees. So we're talking thousands of dollars compared to the discount of just a couple of $100s. So there really is that discrepancy there.
While providing this explanation, Ms. Juma touched on 2 other problematic aspects of Canada's policy, the financial toll and the biometrics. When asked about the money needed to bring refugees to Canada, here's what Ms. Elmardi and Mr. Sati had to say about it.
And so you can think about all of these numbers and all of these fees, and also at the same time thinking about the financial responsibility and the financial toll of what I mentioned earlier of being able to financially support, not only financially support family members who are now like at the brink of war, people have lost income, people have lost so much, right? People have had to flee their homes, leaving everything behind, and sometimes leaving all of their documents, their passports, all of these things. Some people have had their houses bombed and burned, so they're not able to retrieve these documents anymore. But because the situation is still ongoing, that means the financial responsibility on the diaspora is still ongoing, but also not on a just family level, but diaspora members are also supporting financially and the maintenance and functioning of community kitchens and neighborhoods, of health clinics, evacuations, shelter needs, and so on.
We are facing all this. There are delays, and this has huge implication. For example, number one, the reality that they are facing all this crisis in Sudan. As I mentioned, all this safety, famine, no school, health, all these issues, plus stress we are facing here. And it's also the program is self-funded, which means I had to put money in the bank. So also our money is sitting in the bank doing nothing. Many people have put 50,000, 70,000, depending on how many people they are supporting. This money is just sitting in the bank. You cannot get interest. You cannot invest. And some people were literally doing small business. They took out the money. They put it. They thought, okay, maybe after 3 months they will come and they can reuse the money and continue their business. Now they are stuck. Like 50, 60,000 is not a small money to just keep in the bank for nothing. And then we don't know still how long it will be sitting there.
I asked Ms. Juma for more details on the financial requirements of the program.
So if you let's say I'm the anchor, I'm the family anchor, and I want to sponsor one of my relatives through this pathway, I have to show that last year that I made at least $29,380. So that's the minimum requirement for me. But if I don't meet this amount, so say I made less than $29,000, I could potentially overcome that by showing that I have $9,900 in savings in a Canadian bank account that will be used to support one person coming to Canada, one of my Sudanese family members. As you increase the number of people coming, you have to show more funds. if there's more than one family anchor, then the funds that you have to show also goes up, but then you're splitting it amongst multiple people. So here I can see that on the government's website that you can have more than 7 people as family anchors. So it really just depends on the size of the family. And then the amounts also for that you need to show for your family members that you will use to support them, it will go up as there are more people. So for example, if I am going to be supporting 6 people who are coming in, I need to show that I have at least $22,650 in my bank account to give to support them.
In addition to this enormous amount of money, we've mentioned before the biometrics. Here's what they entail.
So biometrics are just fingerprints and taking a digital photograph of yourself. Most foreign nationals coming to Canada need to get biometrics. There are some exceptions for countries that don't require biometrics, but most of them do. The visa application center in Khartoum is closed. So since the conflict started to get worse in April 2023, Canada sort of shut down its operations in Sudan. So this means that anybody who needs to get biometrics needs to go to another country to have them done. So for example, they could go to Egypt, they could go to Ethiopia, but not only is this potentially very expensive for them to leave, and also very dangerous because there might not be a safe way for them to leave and then to come back. So they're potentially finding themselves stuck outside of Sudan once they leave, or they may not have the proper travel documents. So in the past 2 years, people's passports may have been expired, they may have been stolen during lootings, they might have been lost or damaged, and they might have difficulty obtaining these new ones from the government due to the state of the political situation in Sudan right now. So that's another barrier that people have, that they do need to go outside to do their biometrics, but do they even have the correct documents to go? And if they're still leaving because they're fleeing for their life, they may face that barrier if they do want to come as a refugee later on, where they do not have travel documents to rely on. I'm not personally aware of any situations where biometrics have been waived. I believe it might have been in the Syrian context, but I don't want to give you a firm answer on that. However, there is an organization called the Canadian Council for Refugees, the CCR, and they advocated in this particular context that the biometrics requirement should be waived because of these difficulties that people have to leave Sudan. They don't have easy options to submit biometrics. They would be risking their lives by going to do biometrics elsewhere. And so they wrote an open letter to the government last February, just suggesting that they allow people to do biometrics on arrival in Canada. Obviously, the government has not responded to this particular request. They just waived the fees. So they said you still have to do biometrics, but there may have been instances in the past where Canada was a little bit more relaxed. But because of the current enforcement mindset that we're in, and we see a lot more strict controls on borders and migration, it's unlikely that Canada would be willing to take that step, in my opinion, for this particular crisis.
We don't mind them doing biometric, but if you cannot get it done, then you have to come up with another solution. Instead of being stuck there, and this is supposed to be looked at as a humanitarian case, because these people literally are waiting. There's no schools for children. Children didn't go to school for many years now. And there's no universities, there's no health, there's famine, there's safety. All these bad things is happening to them. And then every day we have to wake up and face this reality.
In addition to the structural issues around getting your biometrics done, Mr. Sati emphasized the delays for those who were able to do the biometrics.
Yes, some of them they done, some of them they haven't even received the biometric letter, because you cannot just do biometric letter. You only do biometric letter if they send it to you. Some of them they haven't received the biometric letter and to go and do the biometric. Some of them they have done the biometric and haven't heard back for a long time. So generally, I think the process itself overall is very slow. We hope IRCC will put more officers to process these applications more quickly, and also do something about the one in Sudan. Now they have we heard that it's going to open maybe in April, but we are not sure because we have been promised before a few times and didn't happen. So I'm not confident it will open or not. Slow process. Even if they do biometric, they still have to wait, I think, some time. And I think the IRCC need to do something. You wait for 1 year, even if you open biometric center, they should prioritize them and do their application very quickly, because they cannot just do biometric again and wait for 6 months, to get the results. So I hope that they will put more efforts, more planning into how to bring these people quickly to Canada.
As we've seen, delays, high fees, and a very limited number of places are issues the Sudanese community is mobilizing to fix. Next, the guests will speak on how they are trying to change the situation and the effect it had. The first thing they'll touch on is the role of the media.
I think the media plays a big role. The media is a one-man channel to bring information, to educate the people. So I think the media has a big responsibility, big role on this one. And so then more people will have more information, and then people will be more willing to help as soon as they understand. Because in general, citizens are good people who are with good heart and people who are willing to help. But many of them, even they have no idea what's going on. So the media should bring more attention to this conflict.
On this topic, I asked Mardi about the framing of the Sudanese humanitarian crisis as the forgotten crisis. This is what she had to say.
I've seen so many comrades and friends challenge a little bit the forgotten war thing, and I definitely agree with them in the sense that, it is not forgotten by us. It is not forgotten by the Sudanese people at all. It is intentionally ignored, right, by the international community, whatever that may be. But there is definitely an intentional ignorance, an intentional lack of coverage. Like when we talk about media coverage and so on, of course, it's just not enough.
As mentioned by Karina Juma, in February 2025, the efforts of the Sudanese community have paid off. Indeed, the government announced an increase in the spots available in the family-based program from 3,250 to 5,000 and more. Lastly, before this podcast episode ends, I want to share with you two things. The first one is a new framing of the relationship between Sudan and its diaspora. Here's a little gem Miss Mardi shared with me.
So we collaborated with Cinema Politica, Concordia, amazing organization. And we did a screening for Sudan Remember Us. The film is called Sudan Remember Us by Hind Medib, is the filmmaker. And the film is about, it was captured during the sit-in in Sudan. And it's particularly about the role of art. And so you see in that film, they were bringing in a lot of the chants, the revolutionary chants that people have, the poetry. So, and we call them callings, right? When we go to a protest and people would be chanting things and you would chant with them. And so the callings that we have in the revolution, but also in the previous waves of uprisings and protests, a lot of times are inspired by older chants that we've had from poets like Hamed, from poets like Mahjoub Sharif. And they're usually poetry that was used, or chants that were used during the 64 uprising, which toppled the Aboud regime, and then during the 85 uprising, which toppled the Nimeri regime. And you're seeing them being recycled and used again, and also the younger generation kind of engaging more on that, on those revolutionary chants, and some of them also being kind of there were also ones that we're seeing that were sort of new and sort of more present in the context of the 2018-2019 revolution. So there's definitely a lot. I would really, really recommend Sudan Remember Us, the film, just to see the artistic element of that.
The fact that protest chants are called callings in Sudan is very insightful because it emphasizes a dialogue between the caller and the receiver. Whereas a chant is meant to be heard, a call is to be answered. I think this reflects how the Sudanese communities operates in its tireless commitment to refugees to carve out more spaces for them in Canada. The last thing I want to leave you with is a way to answer that calling.
People can help on whatever petition comes across them. Our website may have some petitions going on as well. So if people can sign that up, that will help.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode, and thank you so much to the interviewees for their time and help in bringing this episode to life.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Human Rights Magazine. The podcast is brought to you by the Upstream Journal. I invite you to consider supporting the program and the magazine with a contribution through PayPal as you explore other episodes.